the reason I was invited to speak to you today is really because of my long time work as a parent, engaged in autism research, and I've been an advocate and wanting to really inspire you to go and get involved in research. And really the purpose of my talk today is really to ask the broad question, why is autism research important, and why should it be important to parents with kids on the autism spectrum? Now, I titled my talk, Lessons from Queen Esther and Other Inspirations, and you'll see in a couple of minutes why I do that. I always like to bring in something that's going on that connects me to you, and I know that Purim is coming, so that's why I had that title. So as I said, I have a very unique perspective. I'm a parent. I'm an advisor to autism research, as Gal said. I also created an online course, and I've just recently done a second master's degree in health sciences around translational research to try and understand how better to do this. So you may have seen me in my TED Talks, you may have heard my story before, and today it's going to be a little bit different. Over the years, it's evolved. My story's really evolving as we speak, and everyone in this room has a story and something to tell, and it's of value, and that's what I want you to think about today. So as Gal said, I've been a longtime friend to Israel. In Canada, we've had deep connections. I've gotten to know, we have so many family and friends. I've gotten to know many research groups across the countries, families, and spoken often. So I have a strong commitment to partnering with Israel, and you'll continue to see me as long as you keep inviting me, and you're welcome to come to Canada and do the same. So what am I going to talk about today? Okay, so these are the three main areas that I really want to touch upon. How did a mom like me with a newly diagnosed child get involved and so immersed in the autism research world? That's number one. Number two, how are autism researchers learning from me and from families, and how are families learning from autism researchers and science? And how is autism research made more relevant and successful as a result of partnerships? So I'm going to go back to the, okay. Oh. No, now, why is it? Oh, here we go. So it's not advancing, Elon? Yeah? Oh, there we go. I got it. So I want to go back for a second to Queen Esther. And as you know, Purim is coming. And I was reflecting about Queen Esther and her role in the story of Purim. And Queen Esther goes from being a passive person in her world to being actively engaged, to taking a very leadership position in the outcome for the Jewish people at that time. And I think that her story, what did she know? And what can we learn from her story? And I started to think about, well, she had to stand up for what she believed in. She had to strategically think of ways to save the Jewish people from Haman's decrees. She had to take risks and put herself in a very difficult position. She had to learn how to be persuasive and use persuasive language and tell a good story. And she really had to face hard choices. So this is what some of my message is today. I think we can all learn from some of those things that Queen Esther had to do and the leadership that she showed us in doing that in the story. So I asked myself the first question, how did a mom with a newly diagnosed child get immersed in this world? And I want to give you some personal experiences and some really perspectives. So for one, my story and our story began as a family. Our son was diagnosed when he was 17 months old. But before he had the diagnosis, and you can see from the pictures, I just put up pictures of my family, and you can get a sense of who we are a little bit. My son was diagnosed as a baby, and before he was diagnosed, I had entered him into a control group for an autism study in eye tracking when he was 2 months old. And why did I do this? I think I had a very fussy baby, and naively at 2 months old, I thought maybe, I saw the poster in my pediatrician's office, which many of us know that's how there's recruitment happening in offices like that, and I saw the poster and I said, maybe somebody will tell me why he's so fussy. I was really not understanding or not really able to deal with the fussiness. And I took him there, and I naively thought they would help me answer that question, but they didn't. And he did eye tracking studies for many months, actually, and when he was 2, 4, and 6 as a control. And really many months later, it turned out they had me curious, but it set me on a path, and ultimately knowing some people that I had met in the center and observing his behaviors and some changes at an early age, which was how his autism revealed itself, he was able to have a diagnosis at 17 and a half months. And this is very young, but at that moment, when I was sitting in the developmental pediatrician's office, much like you would sit in Gal's office, the pediatrician said to me, do you want to help me to understand why and how you recognized this so early and what things you saw? And right away I said yes, and she said, I really want to know. And I think that she set me off, and I've talked about this to her, on understanding how I might be able to really help her. So this is how I got started. And soon after the diagnosis, I also spoke to, and these are Canadian pediatricians and researchers who are very well known in the field. I spoke to a well-known, another researcher, and I said to him, now what? And he said, you know, at this early stage and with the right interventions and with the right help, and some of what we heard the talks today, I think Offer had talked a little bit about and choosing interventions and how to choose. I said, well, I need to understand better how to understand this. And the only way for me to understand is to engage with you, and it'll help me weed out all of the noise that's out there. And he said, with this early stage and the right interventions, your child will lead a normal life. And what does that mean, normal? We all question that, and I didn't know. And we grabbed onto the hope, and we said, okay, we're going to go with that hope and try and discover a path. Now, this was in the year 2000, and the paths were not very clear. They were all over the place, like this and that, and we had to really find our path without much guidance. Now there's much more, but still it fell on my husband and I, and mostly on me. And I began to engage in studies with that developmental pediatrician on the first day, and from there she asked me to join other studies, and I really started out being a participant, and also giving her feedback. And as you can see, you know, it really helped me start to think of where I could contribute. And I have to say that early diagnosis, in our case, for all the explanations we've heard today, helped me as a parent in a different way. And that is that with a little kid, and it helped me jump off and go running. And knowing this is a little kid, I have a chance to be able to change things and maybe make different impressions on people that I meet along the way. And he was a baby. He was not walking, actually. And I also learned about myself that I learn best by doing. So I had to do things, and I got more and more involved in the autism research community, and they engaged me by asking me to participate in committees and collaborate with them mainly on research, family research councils, which I had a strong voice on those councils. At the same time as this was happening, I met Michal Bagan in Toronto, and she and I ultimately, with some help from some other autism scientists both in Canada and Israel, founded the Canada-Israel Autism Research Initiative and held the first conference in Jerusalem back in 2014. So it was a long road, and there were many years that I was in my home and with my child and the therapist and intervention and observing, and to the point where I began speaking about my involvement and what I saw and some of the work that I had done. So it could feel to many of you who have little kids like this road is very far, but it isn't. It goes by really fast. And here I am with a 20-year-old who's skiing and jogging with me. So I want to talk about how we're learning from each other, but I want to give you a little bit of context from that story. So there are many changes that are happening in the autism research communities, and certainly in a Canadian context. So historically and traditionally, we know that there's been a big gap in between research and the autism parent community. And what are the reasons for these gaps? There's so many myths about research being not accessible, and we learn today that it is accessible and it's becoming more accessible. The research process always hasn't had room for families. Where do they fit? Research protocols don't include families, they don't include family voices, and there's very specific protocols that you learn in doing research studies that don't have room for this. On the other side, parents also think, well, what do I have to add? I'm just a parent, and I know I felt that way at the beginning. Wait a minute, I'm just a parent. And there was a mutual respect between me and my pediatrician, and she opened up her heart to me, and I did the same to her. I think that we struggle with some of these questions about how to engage and how to partner, but things are starting to happen. And I think that there is a willingness, and I've really seen and experienced movement in the Canadian community, because that's where I am, how researchers are open to wanting to bring in families into their research projects, into their organizations, into their institutions, and they don't know how. And parents don't know how either, then they want to. And I think that this is where there needs to be more work done, and I might talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. But as there's a growing body of evidence of it happening, and there's a lot of actual research evidence coming out of the UK, that there's now a research discipline called family engagement in research. And it specifically addresses the factors that are designed to help and build partnerships between the research communities, and particularly in childhood disability, and with parents. So how are we learning from each other? How are we doing this? It's a lot of hard work and building partnerships and efforts, and it's evolving. So now I can tell you from a Canadian context that many families are sitting on research advisory boards of institutions, and they're getting involved in specific projects of interest to them. So that's one way. There's now movements to build databases, as you are doing here, and to include families who are interested not just in being part of research in terms of subjects for database, and I'm all for that, but they're also talking about their interest in partnership in research, and they're indicating those kinds of things and that they would like to be involved with, and these databases are being built in institutions. That is an infrastructure issue, and more institutions are building these infrastructures to help parents get involved. Now, there's examples of organizations in hospitals in Canada that have hired people to specifically broker the partnerships between researchers in childhood disability and families. So these are things that are starting to happen. There are more and more champions, researchers coming forward saying, I do this, you can follow me, and here are my models. And funding bodies across Canada are requiring researchers who are putting in dollars in competition for grants to have families named on their grants. So this is how the change starts. And I want to emphasize with you, that's how we're learning from each other. In the pictures that you see here, you can see that I've put many of the people that you know in this picture, but it's me as well as other families attending autism conferences, giving a TED Talk, which I did a number of years ago, and actually participating in a scientific study as well. So one of the things that, as Gal mentioned, we designed a course actually to address this gap in lack of training for both parents and research trainees. And we designed it at a childhood research institute outside of Toronto, and it was particularly for parents with kids with autism and other childhood neurodevelopmental conditions, and research trainees, mainly postdocs, some clinical, there's some clinical professionals on the course as well, but mainly researchers and parents. And we take a 10-week course online and we discuss what does family engagement mean to them, and how are they feeling when they start and when they finish, and what kinds of levels of confidence are they building by being involved in a course like this. So this course I co-designed with a researcher, and we're co-delivering it together, so it's a really good example of how it's happening. We asked those students, and now we're at 120 students that we've taught, 60 family members and 60 researchers, and we asked them how they felt about engagement in research and what it really means to them. And you can see some of the words. This is a word cloud that came up that addresses sort of the most important words. You know, you've probably seen it in Hebrew when it's live and we were in an audience, and these are the words that came up. And the biggest thing really that stands out is the willingness, the openness, the communication, and the listening skills that are required of each other. And the whole idea of family engagement in research is built on a foundation of trusting and building relationships and trusting relationships in each other. And that's the foundation of which this is based on. So this is where we're starting, and we're starting to help families move along a continuum to do more and more. I can give you an example of some of the things that are happening in Canada that relate to this. So there are engagement councils that are giving their input onto new designs in research studies on brain stimulation and MRI. Parents are sitting down with the scientists and talking about ways to increase the chances of including kids going through the MRI, kids that wouldn't normally be able to handle it. How do we design a study that enables them? How do we reach out to these kinds of kids so that not just participating, but so that these children throughout their life will be able to do these kinds of things. And they're actively investing in designing the study to do this. So that's only one of many studies, and I could go on and on about some of the ways that we're really starting starting and have been engaging with the research community. So how is research made more relevant, and autism research particularly made more relevant as a result of family engagement? So if we think about it, the primary voice that we're bringing to the table is the voice of the family. And it's such an important voice, and it's a perspective that you wouldn't get unless you're sitting together and discussing the issues. So the value is creating that opportunity to share those perspectives. It also creates a sense of community. I mean, I look out onto all of you and I see a community here, and I think it's really important to be able to continue to engage this community in different ways. This is one way, by speaking and presenting to you, but there's so many other ways, and you can also give your voice to research. I think there's other there's so many unique insights that we can impart as family members onto the research teams and perspectives, and it allows the research to become more relevant. And I think this is what we want. We want to narrow the gap between research, which seems out here, and parents who are here. And we're narrowing that gap, and we're also understanding the goals of research, the values, so we're coming also closer to research communities. So I see that I don't have a lot of time, but I really want to play a clip that my son did. And before I do that, I would just want to say that I think there's a lot to be learned here in Israel about some of these models that I'm talking about. And I think it's a hope that when I'm talking, that I'm going to begin a dialogue so that it happens in this community as well. But I want to really play you the next slide. It's a little clip. I hope it works. This is my son and me, and his best friend and his dog, who he loves, who's playing in the snow. I want to play, it's about a 7-minute clip, but maybe I'll just fast forward it, Gal, and but of course I have to figure this out, how to do this, but I want to play the clip to show you a little bit about what Eli says about research.
I spend about 99.999% of my life not thinking about it. So I'm probably, I don't want to discredit all the great work that the researchers are doing, but I'm not as inspired daily as someone like you are. I don't think it has to be necessarily inspiring absolutely everybody involved. It benefits everybody involved, but when you're sort of part of it, you're engrossed in it in a way that it's normalized for you. This is just stuff I've always been doing. It's very difficult for me to appreciate the results coming out of it when it's just sort of something that I've just been taking part in at an early age. And then when I became sort of, okay, do I want to participate in this? Then you can really see what actually you're doing. Then you can see, look, how does this Google Glass project impact, how could it impact people who might have more trouble in social settings? Like the software that we were testing was a very basic for me, but maybe for other people it could be very, very useful in helping them sort of navigate. And it's too bad it's a discontinued product. But it's more like that, and I mean, it's not necessarily inspirational to those involved, but it's more to who can really appreciate the research, or who can really actively appreciate the research, and that's more like you. So I'm going to hand it back. I'm handing it back over to you. I'm going to see, yeah.
And I'm going to hand it over to Richard.
Well, it sounds like you both have appreciated. Yeah. There's different, I love the fact that there's really two very, you've benefited, but there's two different perspectives. One of someone who, you're thinking of your contributions and moving things forward to impact your son's life. And Eli, who's saying, I've known this forever. This is just how it's been for me. And I know that some...
Yeah, you can just go to the next one. Actually, Yeah. So you get a little taste because my son had participated in giving feedback on some Google Glass design work, and he had become involved, and they'd asked him to help them redesign it, and he just said, well, you know, and this is how he explained his involvement, and he said, really, it's more important to you, Mom, than me. So that was the bottom line message. So I'm going to finish by saying that we're at a cusp of a new frontier in how parents can be much more active in autism research. And I think that the future is headed towards more engagement with youth and adults. I think that more training is necessary for families and researchers to understand better how to be good partners. I think that we all, I think that storytelling is a way you can do this. If you want to tell your story, we all can find a way to tell your story. It doesn't have to be public speaking. Maybe it's a written word. Maybe it's in some other way. If we can engage people and have an opportunity to understand their stories, this is really, really powerful. And lastly, I think the new frontier is more collaborations between Canada and Israel. And there's lots to be learned. There's things happening, and I'd like to see more of that. So in concluding, I just want to say I encourage you to build your communities and engage and be a part of something that's very important to you. And I'll leave you with my personal philosophy that really does drive me to keep going. And that is that I'd like to see research inspired by parents. Parents are the closest to their child, and it's a parent's job to help their child grow and develop. In this capacity, the parent becomes an interpreter and an enabler, interpreting the actions of their child and enabling others to see the value that their child has and begins, and it starts to begin a movement to change. I also believe that it's within this process, like Queen Esther, who had this metamorphosis, that we as parents can understand ourselves best, and that one day our children will show us the way, will lead the way, and they will then have helped us capture the essence of what it's like to be human. So thank you very much.